Welcome back to the Agent of History podcast, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to it as a podcast. Welcome back to this journey, a journey of exploration into these two questions of how did we break and how do we heal. And on this journey, I'm interviewing guides who can help us explore the terrain that we need to explore in order to uncover and develop answers to these two questions. And I'm really honoured to be joined today by a new guide who is Professor Richard Hall. Richard is Professor of Education and Technology at De Montfort University and a National Teaching Fellow here in the UK. He's a trustee of the Open Library of Humanities, a member of the Management Committee of Leicester Primary Pupil Referral Unit, and an independent visitor for a looked after child. Richard is the author of The Alienated Academic, The Struggle for Autonomy Inside the University, and as of yesterday, that is the 18th of May 2021, he is the author of the newly published The Hopeless University, Intellectual Work at the End of History, which is out with Mayfly Books. Richard describes the Hopeless University as the flag bearer for a collective life that is becoming more efficiently unsustainable. Richard writes about life in the university at richard-hall.org, and he centres hopelessness twice a week by watching the struggles of Walsall Football Club. So join me for this enlivening, exciting and important conversation about how so much of the knowledge in our society is produced today and how it might be produced so differently. Richard, welcome to the Agent of History podcast. Great, so glad that you're here.
Thank you for having me. Lovely to be here. Yeah, lovely sunny morning.
It is indeed. We're owed a few of those.
We are.
So as you know, this journey is kind of framed by these two questions of how did we break and how do we heal. And of course, every guest is going to explore that in their own particular way. We're going to talk a lot today about the university. So I don't know how you want to start this question of how did we break from your perspective, and we can start the conversation there.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? The kind of notion of kind of historical time. I've been thinking quite a lot about that recently, and what that means. So if I've been thinking about your question, I guess I've been thinking about the unfolding of capitalist social relations, of capitalism, of the unfolding through different phases, I guess, of means of kind of control over people's lives, the ways in which whatever we is the other thing I'm kind of interested in your question. You know, who is this we? Who did the breaking? Who was broken? Who do we not care about along the way? And the people we don't care about along the way don't generally look like me. You know, as a kind of white male professor working in a university, they generally look black, brown, of colour. They generally look, they're generally women. They're generally precarious. They're generally queer. So they're generally made marginal. I think so there's something about the we in that as well, and the agency that people had in that process, and the ways in which we, in particular, I suppose, in the global north, or kind of the west, or the North Atlantic, however we want to kind of frame that, because I think there are still differences in that space. If we're thinking about, there's some quite interesting work on the Second World, or the kind of the former Soviet states, and how are we co-opting them into these narratives too, within that sort of space. I think there's a sense of how were we folded into a process of estrangement, effectively, divorce, separation, of on a global terrain, because it's increasingly on a global terrain, of ourselves from our material practice in the world, so how we make the world and how we make ourselves, from each other. I think that's increasingly the case, and I think that's become. I think the pandemic has kind of shown that increasingly as well. We had the thing yesterday about that report about the number of people who feel that if you've lost your job, it's your own fault. You're not good enough, effectively. You haven't worked hard enough. That narrative as well that then becomes embedded. I think that, and this is a particular kind of take, I guess, from England, from the UK, and I would need testing if we were thinking about it in terms of, I don't know, Latin America or South America or wherever. I think that we're also divorced from the natural world. We have this sense of we've got to find a way of ignoring the virus, for instance, or we're gonna annihilate it, right? Because we're Promethean. It's a Promethean sense of we have man, and it is man generally, or those characteristics can control the world and can dominate the world and can dominate nature, and we think the same about climate change. So one of the ways in which we are psychologically broken, I think, is in that that sense that Boris Johnson releases his lockdown plan, and within 24 hours, Ryanair's bookings have kind of gone up 350% or whatever. And yet we're in the middle of a global crisis of climate forcing, of collapsing the nitrogen cycle, of access to phosphates, of ocean acidification, but there's no conversation about that because we think that we can, we have some kind of Promethean technological control. So we're divorced from our natural world and settings as well, which further divorces us from people who have to, who are providing the raw materials for those kind of Promethean technologies that are going to solve things. And then fundamentally, and I think this is really crucial, and it speaks to some of the things that you are trying to do, I think, in this podcast around spiritual materialism, is that we are increasingly completely divorced from ourselves as anything other than one-dimensional, one-sided pieces of human capital, and we can't imagine ourselves as anything else. And so that's part of the problem. How do we break? It's a deeply dialectical process, isn't it? It's a deeply interconnected historical process through which, I guess, there is an interrelated set of ways in which we've decided to produce the world. That we've created a metabolism. We have created a metabolism with the world, with nature, with each other, which is extractive, it is exploitative, it is expropriating of people's lives and hopes, and we can't imagine anything else. In part, I think, because we are so utterly because we're divorced from each other. We don't see the pain that's caused. We hide it away. We ghettoize it, so we lose empathy with people, and we don't want to see that. We're so disconnected from it. We hide behind cop shows on TV, or we want to play Grand Theft Auto, or we want to play FIFA, or we want to go down to Boozer and watch whichever poxy football club are playing that night, and that's the limits. And I understand for a lot of people that's the limits, because their lives are so precarious, and because their existences are so precarious, and because they're self-medicating, and because they're self-harming, and because they don't know anything else. So I'm going to shut up, but I haven't answered your question. But it's a deeply interconnected set of kind of issues, I think, that we need to have a better sense of, that has its root in the way in which we produce the world.
I think it's a beautiful answer. It's a really heartfelt answer, but obviously it's a very intelligent answer that at its heart is saying that, as you say, the way that we are reproducing the world, and therefore ourselves, is fundamentally broken, and we're alienated, estranged, separated, fractured, fragmented in all of the ways that you outline. And of course, that, as you say, is now on a planetary scale, which means it covers it covers every aspect of that reproduction of our species, and obviously of life itself now. But we can narrow the lens for this conversation to the university, and the university is obviously a really, really important sector in that, because it still remains a dominant place where knowledge is produced, and obviously the relations by which, through which, and the systems by which and through which that knowledge is being produced in universities today exhibits all the same characteristics of brokenness that you've just outlined. And that's basically the heart, at least of the first half of the book that's coming out hopefully soon, called The Hopeless University. So maybe we can just focus in on how that plays out in the capitalist university today.
Yeah, that's fine. And I think it's important to situate the university as a kind of a node in a wider network, which is one of the
Yeah.
things that I try to explore a little bit. The picking up on, I don't know, we might want to think about it as kind of in terms of Marx's work on joint ventures and joint venture capital that's used in order to leverage more economic value and more surplus effectively. And the university is a joint venture or an association that operates in society. It doesn't exist outside of that space. So when people talk about, oh, we'll leave the university and go into the real world, it's just it's a nonsense. I don't even understand what that point is. But there is a thing, isn't there, about universities that they are regulated in particular ways, and they are governed in very corporate ways, and their funding comes in ways, certainly in England, in ways in which emphasize particular kinds of consumption and transactional kind of relationships and positionality amongst kind of staff and students. So that's, and they're governed by metrics, and in order to I guess maybe kind of improve on those metrics and improve on league table position, that you have a raft of consultancies and policy wonks and whoever else. As part of a feeding frenzy around universities, we can sell you these services in. We can improve your league table position by improving the student experience, because we will sell you this technology or this approach to data management or information flows or whatever it is that will make you more efficient, and you can extract more surpluses in whatever way. So then we have institutions that have partnerships with, we saw, say, a number of institutions have got partnerships with particular providers for sort of student meals and for subsistence for students who were locked in during the pandemic, and then people will be tweeting about how abhorrent those meals were and what people were being charged for them, and these are partnerships that universities have as well. And then they have partnerships with technology vendors and publishing houses, and some of them have taken out bonds in the bond market, so they're beholden to insurers in the bond markets as well, and they have to maintain a credit rating with Moody's or whomever. So these are deeply implicated global networks. And it's a concrete institution that exists in a city or in a region or whatever it might be, but they are also implicated in flows of capital, in rentier economies, in extractive economies across the globe. And they're also, if they're in the kind of global north, they're potentially involved in commodity dumping in the global south. They're potentially involved in flows of labour, of resources, of cash out of all other markets into them to reinforce them, So there is a sense that the university actually is almost a perfect vehicle to analyse this kind of broader break or separation from society, because it isn't. Once you start to unpick it, it is not a thing. It shows the deep implications of culture, of practices, of structures in the reproduction of an alienating global system, which operates differentially and affects people differentially. So I think the university is really important in that space. I think the final thing I would say for the moment is that you are right. It is held up as it is still held up as a paragon of the ability to develop new knowledge. But part of the problem is that there is an obsession with knowledge as truth, with evidence as truth, which will seek to solve the problems of capitalism as if that is a closed system. As if there are no externalities that are we just need to finesse the system. If we can just find the best algorithm, the best way of working, the best amount of human capital, whatever, just keep refining. And so the university's knowledge is used to keep, through separated subjects, through separated individuals, through competition, is used to reproduce that idea that there is, in some way, knowledge is truth, rather than ways of knowing the world that are deeply relational, that need to respect the other. Those kind of things, and I think that is deeply problematic for the university. And I think those of us who work in universities and want to kind of work in a relational way with students, with each other, with partners who want to be more cooperative, find that those deep estrangements, modes of competition inside, again, deeply alienating. They are incredibly problematic. And I always remember, it's an interesting one if we think about This is literally the last thing I'm going to say now. I'm going to shut up for you. I'm always taken back to, we had a radical pedagogies conference at De Montfort back in 2019, and I always remember it was talking about the legacy of the Macpherson report 20 years on, about kind of institutional racism. And Gurnham Singh from Coventry was there. You know Gurnham?
Yeah, of course.
Great guy. He was there, and he was talking about, he made this statement. He says, how is it in the allegedly most liberal institutions in the land we're having to talk about institutional racism? Why is it in these allegedly most liberal institutions in the land are people coming and sharing their experiences of trauma with each other? No. And it was particular people who are having to share those instances, And I think that is, for me, that is about knowing, empathy, relationality, acceptance, respect, dignity. And I think that that's one of the things that I try to pick up in the book is this idea about dignity and who has dignity inside the university.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so central, such a central theme that we are. You spoke in your first description of like how we broke about our almost total absence now of imagination. One way of saying the same thing is, of course, we see and are now, compelled to see ourselves only in relation to capital. And in the context of the university, that means, I remember this part in your book, we talk about, fear, hope and fear. And the hope, if you're working in a university, say, on the academic side, is that, your talents will be seen, and you will get that grant or that fellowship, and you'll get that tenured job, and your dreams will come true. You'll get that professorial status and the stability and the kudos that comes with that, and the social status that comes with that. And then the fear is literally, to quote you, is the fear of academic death. That you won't get those grants, and so our lives are, and our hopes and our fears, literally our hopes and our fears and our dreams are all individuated or individualized, I should say, in the context and in relation to capital rather than in relation to each other. And that's just not in terms of each other, in terms of course, in terms of just other academics. It's in terms of the whole of humanity that is in the body of the university and beyond, of course, in the body of society. There's a bit where you say that the university functions for itself, and the best that we can do, as you say, certainly in this technocratic way, is for in a paternalistic way, is for the university to come and help society. I did a quote marks there for those listening to the podcast, rather than being the university as a place of producing knowledge for society and with society, and knowledge being produced far beyond the campus of the university as well. But
no, and I think part of it is that there is there's a competitive tempo that is set within these institutions, and it's set again by the performance of people who look like me, who have limited caring responsibilities or who can outsource those caring responsibilities, who are who are predicated upon those kind of that level of competition around, as you say, the fellowship or the grant or the tenure or the chair or whatever it might be. But it equally infects the whole body of the university, so we see the ways in which the generation of surpluses affects our professional services colleagues, without whom we can't flourish, we can't exist, and it diminishes their work, and it forces them to have almost impossible workloads as well, or to face precarious employment, and a lot of them are kind of women or are of color, made precarious. It's the same with students. I think one of the things is we kind of get separated out and played off against each other within the institution around kind of competition all of the time. So there is no scholarly community of professional services staff working with a range of academics, working with students, working with postgrads. It is, are you an early career researcher? Are you a program administrator? Are you a technician? Are you a senior technician? Are you a lab technician? Are you and we see it in the pandemic, that kind of estrangement and separation out, which reinforces particular cultures. So who is forced into work during a pandemic? Who has to go into work? Who is forced to do the work for the university of securing spaces when students, for whatever reason, are not masked up, or have colonized a room for a meeting or a social or whatever it might be. There are those ways in which I think universities tend to be careless of us, and they tend to set a kind of a cultural norm, all sorts of cultural norms that pivot around forms of anxiety. So, who is forced into the university to work because we have to maintain business as usual? Who is competing for those limited fellowships or that limited funding? And if you don't get it, what happens to you? Are you forced onto a teaching only contract? Do you fail to get tenure? Do you fail to get that professorship? Whatever it might be. And here I'm always kind of reminded of those professional services staff, those contractual staff, those staff who are having to be supported by the IWW union, those academic staff or students who have committed suicide because the cultures inside these institutions, or they've self-harmed. Because the cultures inside these institutions are such that they cannot see any other way out, and that isn't just down to those institutions. This is a societal issue. What is it that has led us to this position where we are so culturally and personally broken that all we can see is our own human capital as a means of putting food on the table, And I think about this quite often in terms of the fact that we have the wit and the ken and the understanding and the knowledge to be able to put people on the moon. And we have the wit and the ken and the knowledge to be able to get bananas and coffee just in time from Costa Rica or Honduras or wherever it might be. And, in the aftermath of 2007-8, the global economy gets rebuilt on the back of kind of Chinese consumption, and we see their ability to kind of plan around that. And I completely get all of the kind of the carbon related issues that are embedded within that. It's not beyond the ken of us all to define something different if we wanted to.
No,
but the problem is we don't want to.
The example that comes to me, and this is, I want to lead into this example will lead into a question about the nature of capital. I think it's important that I want to kind of clarify. The example that came to me is of how, if in America, and I suspect here, that if you order a Domino's pizza, you can track it every inch of the way to your door. But literally thousands of children have been separated from their parents in America, and they don't know where the parents are.
Yeah.
So there's something about our system, about capital, that clearly cares more about the commodity, the pizza, than the life and welfare of human beings. And I want to ask you, because I was thinking about this the other day, that there is a reason why Karl Marx called his main work Capital rather than capitalism, or why do you think why? What and the question, I think you probably getting it already, but because it comes very strongly in your work, you bring in Hegel as well, talking about this capital as a spirit, and so or a force. So I wonder how you understand capital, because it also allows us, in order when we focus that way, firstly it allows us to think more dialectically, I think, and by that I mean what is inherent in the system creating hopelessness that can be, in your words, kind of decomposted and reintegrated, that reveals that the possibility within that lies inherent within us already. And the second thing is that it allows us to get away from a very kind of simplistic and ultimately misguided understanding that it's all about greed, or it's all about, it's about certain inherent and trans-historical human characteristics, like, well, humans are just greedy, or humans are selfish. So what is capital rather than I think rather than capitalism? And
so it's a really interesting one, because when I was writing the previous book on the alienated academic, I was kind of thinking about this, as kind of I suppose capitalism as a kind of a system of capital. So that historically, if we're thinking about it historically, the ways in which we're always thinking about it in terms of kind of mercantilism, and then we're thinking about movement into industrial capital, that kind of thing, those kind of historical trends. And this idea that I suppose around there's a moment, isn't there, at which the gravitational pull of a range of capitals gets to that point that something collapses, and has such effectively into a system that you codify around around structures that are constantly shifting and playing and morphing, and cultures that are doing the same. You're pulling other communities in through your practices. You are pulling in you're expanding empires, you're pulling in other peoples, you're grabbing resources from elsewhere in order to capitalize those. So I quite like thinking about it as a kind of a universe. Mike Neary, Glenn Rikowski, amongst others, Moshe Postone, talk about, the universe of capital. And I quite like thinking about that in relation to, the fact that Marx starts volume 1, which John Holloway's quite strong on. What's irritated me so far is I've just mentioned about half a dozen blokes, right? In the context of of both books that I've written, I'm very minded about the work of Sarah Ahmed in Living a Feminist Life, which is about you cite your sources and you don't just make it white men. I think one of the things for me in that is the stuff I'm much more interested in, I guess, does have a kind of more of a kind of an indigenous kind of take on it now at the moment. There's a point at which, when Holloway talks about, Marx's first sentence in Capital about wealth. What's wealth then? And in this system, it's that kind of accumulation of commodities. The commodity is the cell. Is the kind of or we might think about it as the atom, right? And it's those atoms that kind of come together and then create that sun, that furnace, that thing that generates its own gravitational pull, and then pulls in, either has other things orbiting around it, or pulls other things into a broader system of existence with its own gravitational pull that it becomes very difficult to escape from. And part of the issue for me is, if we're thinking about capital, it's kind of I buy into that idea that it's a social relation. I buy into that idea that it enables me to see myself. I mean, I know you and I don't, right? But me to be able to see myself as a producer of intellectual capital in some way. I'm a teacher who adds value in a particular way, and I have to fight really hard to think, no, that's a psychological value. That's a relational thing. That's the values we have. That's around dignity, love, care, generosity, tolerance. It's about around those things. Whereas the system doesn't want that, really. Or the system wants that if it can monetize them or grab. If I'm more tolerant and caring and blah and all of that, and we can get more out of my relationship with my students or my postgraduates, or in terms of knowledge transfer or spillover activities, or the impact of my research, then brilliant. Otherwise, I don't really care other than that, the system, and so, and really, I suppose for me, that existed before Marx was writing, because we would, in guild structures, I guess it had a different flavour, because they all have historical flavours, don't they, to them? But there was an extent to which we were trying to extract surplus from things that we made. And that includes our relationships. Over time, we get to a point where, in order to expand the system, in order to expand that kind of value production, we need to create a system for it. So we're going to enclose. We're going to rip people off the land. We're going to force them into cities. We're going to force them to work in particular degrading ways. And there's going to be pain around that. So we go and we read Engels, sort of the condition of the working class in England, and we're horrified by it. And then we read stories now about people under lockdown and what they're having to go through, or people dying of hypothermia in Texas or whatever it might be. And we think, oh my God, to what extent have things moved on within this space? So I think there's a sense that kind of capital, as a focused around the generation of commodities from which you can extract surpluses, they've kind of existed outside of a system, but that system's almost to an extent you begin to kind of codify it, but more than that, I guess, it almost gets naturalized, because we can't imagine ourselves and our work and our thinking as anything other than intellectual capital or social capital or human capital or economic capital. And that's true of the university, which can't really imagine itself as anything other than those capitals that it can generate a surplus from. And that it can drag more people into its orbit. We can put more bums on seats. We can generate impact by working in terms of public engagement in new areas or whatever it might be. So it works at that level. It also works in terms of me as an individual. There's just a maturity to the kind of the place of capital within the way in which we produce society, where capitals might have coexisted, I guess, with other kind of forms of production historically, whereas now it becomes very difficult for those other forms of production to exist outside of a system which is about the extraction of resources, rents, blood, sweat, tears, whatever it might be. That becomes codified. It's one of the reasons why, actually, if we're thinking about your second question, which is how do we mend or how do we heal? How do we heal? I've been very taken with Crader's work on Marx's ethnographic manuscripts, which relate, because we have this sense, don't we, that things broke after the Grundrisse, and then he just went down a political economic route, and he was interested in capital and the natural world, and the philosophical went by the by, but actually it's just nonsense, from the critique of the Gotha program right the way through to the ethnographic stuff. He's thinking about these issues of, well, what then? What lies beyond capital? And for me, the critical thing in that is that relationship between an obsession with commodifying everything as a basis of extracting surplus, rents, economic value, and that defines our relationships. We can't imagine relationships beyond it, on the one hand, and on the other hand, actually, if we flip that, then what are our values? What's our value set then? And what does that therefore mean? How is that negotiated relationally, accepting the political economics of the situation, which are we have to put food on the table, pay down our rent, put our kids through school, deliver to the food bank, whatever it is. We accept those things, and we work with them as material, and we attempt to move, accepting that the capitalist system wants at every moment to commodify that. At every moment, it wants to commodify that. So how do we accept that and discuss it and attempt to move beyond it? Again, I don't think I've really answered your question, but there's something deeply historical about it.
No, I think that's the beauty, that's the importance. We have to be historical about it, and that's what I was thinking, actually, how to maybe summarise the kind of key points you're making, which is because obviously what looms as a central way of thinking about the world in your book is this term, the end of history, and the end of history. So the end of history being this idea, very, very briefly, that the collapse of the Cold War, there's only one game in town, and that's, the end of history. It's liberal consumer capitalism, and that's going to sweep the world, and there's no more, struggles to ideological struggles to fight. This is it for till the sun burns us up, basically, or we burn ourselves up. And we're at the end of that period because of the crises coming from 2008, obviously the ecological crisis, the pandemic, the end. We're at the end of history, and we're at the return of history. And so what you've been talking about really is history as different epochs, characterized by different modes of production, different ways by which we were exploiting each other to get value or to get wealth out of things, and how a system around a particular mode, which is of capitalism, emerged and then consolidated and then expanded to form I was almost tempted, because you didn't use the word like a law, but in a physics sense, a law by which wherever you are in the food chain, you have to function according to its. Marx is very clear on that. A capitalist has to take the capital accumulated and can't just take it off and go off to desert island. That's when they stop being a capitalist. They have to continue to recycle and grow the accumulated capital. Anyway, so we're at this key moment, and what I was going to say, so a point of like maximum alienation, essentially, revealed not least by the pandemic. So what is absolutely integral to your work in this book and beyond and before, and then your thinking is obviously very, very rich, decolonial, intersectional work coming from very rich feminist and decolonial traditions in particular, right across the world. And I've seen like that growth or evolution in your thinking, because I remember earlier stuff that you wrote about, and I was really engaged with like the idea of Marx's work on the mass intellectuality and all of that, which is still wonderful work. But there's I guess the question is as we turn to the second question of how do we heal, what has been so fundamental in your exploration of that work, of that decolonial and feminist work, that helps you to answer the question with the beauty that you do in the second part of your book, really?
You're very kind. Thank you. Thank you. I'm not kind about my own work, so it's really lovely to hear you say that. The things that have really driven me, because I'm a bit of a jackdaw, really, so I'm kind of interested in exploring a range of kind of, understandings of the world that enable me to understand the world and bring them together. And I think the beauty of those other readings for me, of those other ways of kind of bringing conversations and voices in, is that I was going to say perfect storm, but it is an awful position that we are in terms of environmentally, in terms of the alienation of ourselves from all of the things that we've already discussed, in terms of what is happening to marginal or communities made marginal, periphery, if you want to use that term, what is happening to those people in terms of the treatment of the pandemic, where we're getting hoarding in the global north of vaccines, and no real kind of way out elsewhere for other kind of communities, or no desire to learn from those communities. That I don't want the people who've brought us to that, who generally look like me. They're not the voices I want to listen to get us out of this mess. They're the last people I want to listen to. Absolutely, they should shut the fuck up. I am just so disinterested in listening to those voices, because they are the voices that are dragging us to hell. Just disinterested, not interested. So for me, it's been a thing of beauty, I think, to engage. And I'm just scratching the surface, really. But it has been to engage with those metaphors, sort of Vanessa Andreotti amongst others, around kind of that idea of hospicing. How do we hospice the world? How do we hospice our institutions? How do we hospice the university? And we might think about that whilst it passes, and I think there is something in that about love, accepting. We're told that university work, for instance, is a labour of love. That we do it out of love, and a lot of us are in that space because we care about knowledge production, we care about our students, each other, those things. We see it as a calling. Well, there are elements of that we want to keep, right? So I want to, as we, and I think about this in terms of, say, my nan passing away last year, where we had cared for her for a while at home and kept her at home, and it was a beautiful thing, hospicing her at home whilst she passed away, and then sharing memories and seeing what we could liberate, what we were going to keep, what we were going to get rid of, and what we didn't need anymore. from our relationships and from our relationship with my nan and with the place where she lived and all the memories that were embedded within that. Well, I want to do all of those things for the university. It's why I'm kind of drawn to that movement away from critical university studies to the kind of the idea of the abolition of the university. You know, kind of Eli Meyerhoff's work amongst others. All of the work around, you know, Angela Davis' work around, you know, sort of prison abolitionism, all of this kind of stuff. Audre Lorde's work around kind of at the abolition of the master's infrastructure. You know. Accepting all those arguments that, you know, I don't know what the hell a white man can tell us about kind of abolition or whatever, but at the same time, those are really powerful. And part of that moment of abolition is, how do we draw down on the strength of what we have learned, what we know, what we can do with each other, our relationship to nature, you know, because we built those institutions, right? The capital thinks it built them, but we built it. We built them. Really? Historically, we built them, you know, and we built the knowledge and the ways of knowing. So how do we liberate that then? So I can see you want to come in, so I'm just going to say one more thing.
Yeah,
the other thing that I've thought has been really beautiful, and it's come out of a lot of the work around kind of critiques of settler colonialism and indigenous work for me. And my reading of that has been around composting, you know, and that kind of idea, and which drags us back to a kind of a connection with the land and a connection with space and place, a meaningful concrete. Not this sense of I've got a flight to Greece because my life won't be complete if I can't go to Greece 3 times a year, you know. But a meaningful sense of how do I walk through this place where I live with the people with whom I engage in a meaningful way? How am I anchored there? And how do we recycle what is good for us? How do we recycle what we've made and what we've got that is good for us? How do we mourn what is dying or what is passing? How do we compost down? How do we recycle? How do we get rid of the waste, the toxins of the world? You know, how do we do things better? So this idea of composting, of creating sort of mycorrhizal systems, of repurposing and recycling, and therefore having a much richer connection to our histories, our pasts, ourselves, our cosmologies, our places, our technologies and infrastructures and cultures, all of that. We need a much richer and integrated kind of connection to that, which I think these other narratives potentially give us.
Yeah, what I love about the conversation is that obviously, ostensibly or on a superficial level, this is a conversation about the university, about the social, but the metaphors that you're using, the language that you're using is... I'd say we've had kind of physical, we've had the and very much now the ecological, and it's really all held by a language of social metabolism, social, you know. So just how we are reproducing ourselves, you know, in all our ways, and that speaks already, that embodies prefiguratively already an understanding of a university that should be a universal, you know, a university, but always through your work is always an expression of that university coming through the liberation and celebration of difference, you know. But what I wanted to just come to is I'm reminded I do this course with Thomas Hubel, who's a really brilliant man on collective intergenerational trauma, and he talks about 2 types of anger. Anger, which is like hiding fear. And then there's the anger that is an expression of what he said, something like, to paraphrase him, the denial, the anger that surges up from the denial of the autonomy of existence, of one's to be being or becoming, you know, which for me is a righteous anger. And in your book, you talk about this starting with this negation. We have to totally understand what the beast is, the university is, and more broadly how our society works, in order to actually just to say no to that. And the moment that might begin is this moment of utter desperation and the scream that is released. And it's the scream of, again, to paraphrase you, it's the impossibility of being yourself, your authentic self, and becoming in the university or, you know, or wherever you are in our society. And that really resonates with me, and how we need, through relational spaces, or creating relational spaces of such depth and beauty, that we can allow that screen to become. And for me, especially as another middle-aged white man, I think that it's very, very essential for us to well, we have our screens of our own. That's not to deny our screens. No. But to be present to the screens of those whose subjectivities and whose essential humanity has been rendered impossible.
I think that's right. I think that there are ways, and I love the idea that you talk about that kind of righteous sort of anger. And I think you're right that there are all of those kind of different flavors of anger. I think we generally get blocked, don't we? Because we contribute to the commodification of our own selves and our own lives. Inside the institution is a sort of sense of, well, why haven't I got tenure? Like, God damn it. And it may be structural or whatever. It may be, who knows what it is? Maybe personal. It may be because somebody, don't like you, don't want you to have any cake today, whatever it is, and it becomes like really, in that way, there's a sense in which the anger, where does the anger go? Where do we place it? And do we place it on ourselves, or do we place it on the other, like we do with, say, I don't know, single mothers or whomever it might be. They ain't worked hard. They got sacked because they were lazy, weren't they, or they didn't work hard enough, or whatever it is. There's no sense of anger at a set of structures or a system. We see it now, don't we? With the kind of war on woke is all about this, isn't it? That kind of that deep felt anger that I'm being challenged. You know what I mean? I'm going to place this on all of these kind of woke tards who are threatening my kind of cultural superiority. The risk is, of course, that people turn that anger back in on themselves. It becomes a depressive, melancholic position that you can't escape from. And what are you going to do, therefore, with that? I think part of it for me is the ability for you to for people like me, I suppose, who have more privilege, to use that anger in order to abolish their privilege for the benefit of others and for the benefit more generally of kind of society. And so how do we do that as a more kind of liberatory anger that is a sense of yearning for another world that says, actually, if you can't become you, if you can't become the fullest you, then I'm denied. I can't become me either. I'm stunted. My being and my becoming and my doing and my knowing as processes are all are stunted. I become half a person in that moment. I become me through you. I don't become me because I'm in relation to my human capital or the book I've written or whatever it might be. It's like that is simply a way of opening up a set of conversations that might enable me to explore myself in more detail in conversation with you and other people. And actually, what have I missed? That this stuff on composting or indigeneity or decolonizing. I've got a naive appreciation of it. Okay, well, let's enter into a conversation then, because I, as a human being, and of course I have to be boundaried, and of course I have to protect myself, but at the same time I want to be open to a more, I guess, a better understanding of myself in the world as a means of moving that world, really. And part of that is a personal thing. It's about relationships, and part of that is about my relationship to these structures that are completely sucking the life out of us, so that all we can imagine is, professors who are tweeting about being in the laboratory 100 hours a week, and you won't ever get on if you haven't put in this 100-hour week, and you haven't won X grants, and you're a meaningless academic or member of professional services staff or librarian or student if you don't perform like me. Well, what kind of world is that? What kind of existence is that? That's the living death of capitalist work, isn't it? That's what that is. And are you going to look? But I always kind of figure, when I'm in my rocking chair on my porch when I'm 75, you know what I mean? Sharing a single malt with you, Joel, you know what I mean? What am I going to want to do? Am I going to want to look back on that grant application, or am I going to want to look back on that work that we did in that classroom with those young people who were trying to become themselves? And is it going to be those extra 100 hours that you put in trying to get this, that, or the other journal paper out or not? Now, I completely get that I'm in a privileged position where I ain't got to worry about at the moment about tenure. I haven't got to worry about getting the next badge. I've got all the badges I want in the university. So it is a privileged position. But I think opening up these processes and trying to, and these structures and these cultures in particular and these practices, some more forensic examination in order to say, if we're in the middle of a set of intersecting crises, is this really the best way out? More of the same, acceleration of the same, that there's no other system, you just have to finesse the system. Is that really all we've got?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think the kind of coming into the how we heal, what strikes me again towards the end of the book is, I think the courageous step is where you really bring in the heart and unambiguously and unashamedly, you bring in the heart as a center of knowing and relating that is so vital, and for whatever reason has kind of led me at the peripheries of academia, because I experience academia as such an impoverished space, because it is not a space of the heart. And so, you talk about a continual unfolding is the movement of hearts in each and every moment. And so, when we can talk about that, how we can do that, whether I know that, and I totally respect and admire the way that you refuse to say, well, this is the blueprint of what needs to be done, and because it's all about the answer is just however present we can be to each other is the degree to which we can begin, this journey of healing with the scream of the no, and then we can grieve, and then we can share our experiences, and then we can understand how we yearn for something more, and then by being in that yearning, maybe that can then lead to ideas of how we can actually materially, sensuously work together to create something beyond. Is that fair? Yeah. Is that a fair description of it?
I think so. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because people want blueprints, utopias, recommendations. Richard, what will the university look like in 5 years' time? What will the higher education sector look like? I'm not interested in those goddamn questions. They're part of the reason why we're in the mess we're in. Don't ask me those wrong question. Not answering it. Wrong question. And equally, it's an imposed question. The stuff I like is that stuff, and again, it's a naive reading, right? I remember when Joyce Canham was, I was visiting her when she had. And there's a number of us were, when she was towards the end of her life, and we were, sort of coming in to spend a bit of time with her, and she was giving away her library of books. It was a really beautiful thing, So she said, just go upstairs and choose some books. I went upstairs, and one of them was from Subcomandante Marcos, it was kind of writings about the Zapatista. It kind of got me thinking about, this idea of asking we walk. What do we? I can't move until we've judged where we are. I can't move until we collectively have questioned where we are, why we're here. Where might we go that is more useful to us? So we ask and then we move, and then we ask and then we move, and we do this together. And part of the issue is, and universities operate in this way, that we like to outsource our solutions, right? We're going to outsource our solution to COVID, to AstraZeneca or Pfizer or whoever it is. Or we're gonna, or to Boris, he'll sort it for us, or whoever. Or we're gonna look for that other model, over in New Zealand, because they've got it all sorted, right? It's all perfect over there. So we'll run with that. We're always looking for saviors, rather than to be able to look within ourselves and say, hey, well, we're agents in the world, right? Our agency's stunted, but actually, how do I widen the scope for my agency beyond which kind of tin of beans I'm going to get from the supermarket this weekend, and also for those of us who have the liberty to make decisions about which tin of beans, how do I use that liberty and that possibility to work with those, to open up a space for those who do not have that liberty inside this system, rather than I'm just going to deposit. And I do deposit stuff at the local food bank, but rather than just doing that, what work might we do collectively in order that we don't need the utter disgrace that is food banks? that actually we are able to enact from each to each. We are able to kind of engage with that, and there's only through a kind of opening out of your full humanity, I think, that you can do that, and then you begin to abolish the kind of privilege that you see the privilege, and you begin to find ways to abolish the privilege you have and put that to a wider social use, which is not about competition and power and prestige, because it's a prestige economy all the way through. It is about trying to do other things, and I think one of the things that's important for me in this is it's kind of important, right, that the last book in 2018, that The Alienated Academic, came out, I don't know, like 9 months before I left long-term therapy. So it was like, it was coming out at the end of that kind of 10 or 11 years of therapy, so it's quite significant. And at times I was in therapy 2 or 3 times a week. It was heavy, it was proper, and I was really fortunate that you make your own luck, right, but I could afford it, and you're working through a process there, I think, of becoming brave enough to live your own life in as full a way as you can within the constraints, structural, cultural, practical constraints of life. So I don't need this other person's validation. I can get out. I'm as full a human being as I kind of can be. And I think I see part of that in our work in the university in terms of opening out our hearts and to work together. It's a collective therapeutic engagement, which is about how do we help heal each other by listening and centering each other and centering ourselves in that process. And therefore, part of the issue here, of course, is that we're trying to do this work whilst also working, and it's tiring and caring and loving and cleaning the house and all of those things. So where have we got time for that? So it may well be that we just have to recognize where we're doing that in the everyday anyway. How do we create time and space for those other things? And how do we do that inside a system that increasingly wants to discipline us? So if it sees us doing this other work and it's not creating economic value, well, it's kind of not happy about it, and if we're protesting or we're demoing, if there is student climate strikes, if it's around Black Lives Matter, if it is around anti-austerity stuff, if it is a refusal to work and it is to go on strike, the system has a monopoly of power, effectively, of disciplinary power in terms of and it will bring the state into play in that space. So how do we create an alternative inside quite a brutal and toxic and securitized and militarized space? And I think we need and I ain't got a blueprint for that, but I think we need to have an open conversation about that.
Yeah,
we need to find spaces for that.
No, and that's what I really admire, that honesty, because in the book you very gently and respectfully critique those kind of proponents of hope. You don't critique the people, but you can see the idea of an uncritical or maybe naive hope, whether it's a kind of romantic retrospective hope that it could be just like the public university of the 1960s, where, let's be honest, middle class white people got to get a nice grant to go to. I mean, come on, is that what we want? Or whatever the utopian vision or the hopeful vision, and you have the courage just to say, look, things really are not all right and may not be all right, and we have to take the responsibility of that truth and sit in that truth with each other. And actually, it's being in and with that truth and with each other in that truth. Actually, that's where the kind of alchemical potential of the healing power of truth lies. But as you say, it ain't easy. It ain't easy on an individual level, because we come into that task so damaged, so alienated, so fearful, and also we come into that task, as you say, with structural conditions that seek to manage, control, and discipline us and surveil us at every possible turn. So it
feels impossible, right? It feels like this is so embedded, and it is so the system appears so naturalized and transhistorical. It's like the idea that we think about the university as if it's always going to be here, in the way that, Marks and Spencer's always going to be here, right? Walmart's always going to be here. Manchester United or Man City or whatever, always going to be here, as if they are, until, as you say, the sun burns out in a few million years or whatever. Well, why? And there's a sort of a complete disconnect there from history and history making, and the end of history thing is not, has a lineage. And so I picked it up from Alf Hebunga Bunga, the Global Politics podcast, and but that kind of connects back through to that work of, all that work around it being easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism and all of that. But the idea that actually history making through struggle is back on the agenda. And it's one of the reasons why I'm less interested in, of course, there are brilliant people like Anna Dinnerstein who are doing amazing work on critical hope, and do have a kind of a different take on it.
Absolutely.
From me. I think for me, and this is born of my life, right? And throughout my life, for all sorts of reasons that I'm not going to go into here, hope's not on the agenda. Survival's on the agenda. Hope and yearning for something different in this moment is on the agenda, but hoping that it is going to get better is not on the agenda. You can't afford for it to be on the agenda, because that way just lies some kind of crazy distraction from the reality of what's happening. Now, what becomes therefore more important through therapy for me is the ability to sit with hopelessness and to compost it, process it, see what gets recycled out of it, And I think that there is too much kind of, because we don't want to do the long-term work. And I'm well aware that, I was in therapy for a decade. So that's a long time, right? And it's exhausting and tiring, and it pulls you to pieces. And there are times when people would not have wanted to be around me, and I'd have been horrible and all of that. But they stayed for whatever reason, because, I always get my pint in or whatever. But I think there's a sense within that. It's a long-term project, and doing the work of getting out of this social metabolism that we have created, that is predicated upon extraction and exploitation and expropriation, that is alienating and damaging and toxic in all of its institutions. That's a long-term project, and part of the issue is we psychologically have to get used to the fact that is a long-term project. Just as we ain't going to fix the climate, we ain't going to fix ocean acidification, overfishing, whatever it might be. We don't fix them by May the 1st, 2021. It's a long-term thing where we switch our relationship to each other, to the world, to ourselves fundamentally, to our material practices. And the university is central in that process, because it is a place in which that people want to come to learn and get to know each other and have sex and drink and take drugs and do whatever the hell it is they want to do at the age of whatever, So it is all those things. It is deeply social and relational and economic and political and all of those things. And we need to be those people who work in those spaces, working in society, seeing themselves as deeply connected and implicated within their communities, within a range of communities, need to be brave enough, hope to try to find the space to have those long-term conversations about, is this working in this moment? What might we do differently, with an eye on a different prize than surplus and extraction and profit and destruction? Because that's what it is. So the hopelessness thing for me is we reveal just how we look in the mirror and reveal properly and reveal just how screwed up things are, because they are, But at the same time, in sitting with that, we don't fixate on that and fall into melancholia, because we recognise the models elsewhere. We recognise the care work that is happening in society. We recognise the ways in which people are learning for themselves in society. We recognise the ways in which people are engaging in food banks. They're doing extracurricular stuff. There's student volunteering going on. We recognise all those beautiful things. We recognise the fact that we built these institutions, that it's our knowledge, it's our ways of knowing, and then we bring those into relationship with those other ways of knowing that we seek to commodify at the moment. Well, why? Let's have a conversation with them. Let's see what might happen differently if we enter into a full relationship with them. But that, there isn't a kind of an impact case study in that, I don't think, and there isn't there aren't outputs that aren't I'm not sure there are 4-star outputs in that, and I'm not sure that I'm not sure that puts extra student bums on seats, so it becomes a problematic because our institutions operate within a very short-term timescale, which is generally risk-rated. It's got a RAG rating for all of these activities, So where do we find the time and space for them?
Yeah. No, and I think that's a good place, Tony, to wrap it up, because what you're saying is that we begin with acknowledging the impossibility of it, and by doing so, we see that maybe there is possibility. But that this shift in our time horizon is central. But I know from my own limited but powerful experiences of being in spaces that we can come with such paralyzing, overwhelming, totalizing, or at least experience it as totalizing fear and paralysis. But there is a thawing, there is a thawing.
Yeah.
And, to go back to the Zapatista phrase, we make the road by walking.
Yeah,
and
we
it
do.
might be a very gentle step, but from that first step comes a second and a third. And when we do it in relation with each other, without judgment, with solidarity, with compassion, with love, then things can change. And it's a huge challenge, but it's what we've got to do. It's our historical task.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Richard, for everything, for all your work. And it's brilliant. And it's inspiring, mate. Whether you like it or not, take that compliment.
Awesome stuff. Well, things out, open access, radical publishing house, should be start of May. So we'll continue the conversation anyway.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, so you hope the new book's out in May, is that what you said?
Should be out start of May, yeah.
Brilliant, like the Hopeless University.
Great. Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, mate. All right.
Take care, buddy.
Love. Bye-bye.
Peace and love. Peace and love.